So now that we talked about what a displacement map actually is, let's talk about how we can get it out from ZBrush. There are a couple of ways of doing this. The more traditional way is to go under Tool. Let's just bring it up here. Tool. And Displacement, and we can generate displacement from here. However, this is not a good solution because this does not support multiple UDIMs. Remember how we set up the UV map to be, the head to be over 1001 and 1002? If we go the traditional way, it's not going to fly. So just forget this exists. We never want to touch this here, pretty much ever. There might be one or two cases where you want to go here, but in nearly every single case, you want to go to C plugin, and you have a plugin here called Multi-Map Exporter. This used to be a separate standalone plugin, but Pixologic has now introduced it into the core tools of ZBrush. So this ships with ZBrush. And this, let's be frank, this looks confusing as hell. And that's because it can be. You just have to know what the various settings are. So as the name applies, it's called Multi-Map Exporter. You can export out multiple maps here. So displacement, vector displacement, which we're never going to use. Pretty much never going to use. Normal map, which is handy. A texture from PolyPaint, which is exactly that. This is how we export out our PolyPaint data. Ambient occlusion, cavity, and export mesh out. So we're going to look into these a bit later on. For now, we're only going to focus on displacement. So click displacement. And we're just going to look at the options here. The first thing we need to know is this is obviously how we create maps, because the big button here which says create all maps. Once you're ready to generate your displacement, you just hit this button here and you're going to set a directory and you can save them out. Then we have the button called Subtools. Subtools is really important because as we have multiple subtools here, we have at least 3 subtools here which has sculpting on it, the head, the hair, and the shirt. We want to do them all in one operation. If this is not activated, you will only do the current subtool. Merge maps is also extremely handy. What it's doing is you have 2 objects here, but they share the same UVs. So I'll show you what I mean here. If we go to Modo and we go to UV view, you can see here there are 2 separate objects, but they are sharing the same UV tile. So they're sharing the same one here. If merge map is not on, this will be generated out as 2 separate maps, and you're going to have to merge them together in something like Nuke or Photoshop later on. So by having merge maps on, you're going to be sure that this is saved out as 1 map and not as 2 maps. It gets really confusing if this is set to, if merge maps is not on. Suddenly you get duplicates and everything, and it's really nasty. So keep merge maps on. Then we have the resolution here. I pretty much never go above 4K. I know some guys like to do 8K, but for displacement maps, it's really overkill. If you're painting textures, 8K is useful, and I paint that when I paint textures. But for displacement maps, you're essentially dealing with hand-painted data. And hand-painted data is really soft. Even all this stuff here, it's still very soft. Like you can see here, it's all very blurry. It looks cool from distance, but if you go close up on it, it's very soft. So 4K is more than enough. Like professionally, I don't go above 4K. Then we have map border. Map border you want to set as high as possible, which is currently 16. What this is doing is, let's go into Photoshop again. You see there's a little bleed here? This is what it's doing. You see we currently have a 16 pixel bleed here, which is really nice because we want that. We want to have a bleed which goes here. If the bleed is not on, the map is going to cut right there. Which means if you want to blur the map or anything like that, it's going to go outside the UV borders. And also, let's say the UV smoothing is slightly off. You're going to have really nasty edges here. Set the bleed as high as you can. In Mario, for instance, the bleed just goes crazy and just fills in the entire thing, which is what you want. It looks a bit nasty on the actual map, but it's what you want. You want to set it as high as possible. Then we have Flip V. Just keep this on. I'm not going to go into what this is doing. It's simply or why this is the way it is. Essentially, ZBrush flips all images vertically, so we have to just enable flip V. Then we have re-UV. Re-UV simply smooths out the UVs. I would recommend actually leaving this off. Then we have file names. This is important. We don't really have to worry about this here. We also don't have to worry about displacement, like any of the naming here, because we will change that later on. And naming in ZBrush is a bit terrible when it comes to the maps. And I'll explain why. So if you export out, the way you want your maps to be set up is, let me show you. In terms of naming, you just want to keep it really clean and nice. Textures from ZBrush, maps. So you can see this is the way I name my maps. Everything is just called col, 1002, 1003, and so on. CDisp1, CDisp2, 3, and so on. You can just call them disp as well. This just keeps it simple for me to remember. By default, it's going to put the name of the object in front here. So this might be iDisp 1003 and mouth_disp 1004. So I'm going to have to rename these afterwards just to keep it clean. I'll show you that. But the important thing here is we need the UDIM, or this is set to UDIM. So there are a couple of different conventions here for the UV information. This is simply just telling where the UV tile is in the UV editor. So this goes back to this one here as well. 1001, 1002, 1003, and this convention is called the UDIM system. But there are other conventions out there. So ZBrush is using one, Mudbugs is using one, and there are probably a couple of other systems using their own separate system as well. UDIM is the industry standard though. So just make sure this is set to UDIM. Otherwise you don't get the UDIM coordinates, meaning you don't get the 1001, 1002, 1003, and so on. So keep this set to UDIM. Then we have switch morph target. We have a separate video dedicated to this one because this is really important. You don't have to deal with that, or you don't have to worry about this one if you are working on personal projects. But in a production, this is really important. You literally cannot work in a production with ZBrush without knowing about this button here, which is why we have a separate chapter dedicated to it. And I don't use these ever. Estimate time and reset. Then we have under displacement. And we're not going to worry about any of the other ones here. So displacement, we have which subdivision level will it generate from. This simply means, if you go to this guy here, now if this is set to subdiv level 1, it's going to generate the difference between 1 and highest level. If this is set to something like 4, it's going to generate the difference between this one and this one. So you can see obviously there is a huge contrast between this and this. And there is hardly any contrast between this and this, particularly if we go to like from this level to this level. So make sure this is set to level 1. Then we have adaptive. Adaptive is supposed to make your map a little bit more accurate. Honestly, I don't see too much difference in my maps, so you can probably leave that on as well. And then we have a really deceiving one, because this is called DP subpix. And it's called, as you see here in help, it says higher value, better quality, slower generation. This is extremely deceiving. This is not a quality slider. This is a subdivision slider, which means if this is set to 1, it's going to subdivide the model once under the hood at the render time. So if we have a 4 million poly version model, it's going to subdivide it once to 16 million. If this is set to the highest level, 4, it's going to subdivide it 4 times afterwards. So in some cases, you might be dealing with potentially like 200 million polygons or billion polygons, depending on the poly count. So this is not a quality slider. This is a subdivision slider, and it's really nasty. For years, I thought this was a quality slider, so I kept this up at the highest setting, and it's just endlessly slow when it comes to generating maps. So keep this set to 0. Then we have smooth UVs. This does exactly that. It smooths the UVs. Then we have the mid value. The mid value is what I was talking about before. For the mode of ZBrush pipeline, I prefer to keep this set to 0. This just means that the map is black. This is what I was talking about in this video here. So this is the map coming out of ZBrush, and it's completely black. Which also means if your map comes out of ZBrush and it's black, it's fine. This is a question a lot of guys have. They're frustrated with the map not coming out properly because it's just a black map. It might visually look like a black map, but it's fine. It's just because you can't see the values. So if you use an exposure node and levels, you can just do this. Or if you're using Nuke, you can use a grade node and a roll-off contrast to really bring out the contrast here. I will never use Photoshop this. I'm just using it here because I have Photoshop available right now. But if you want to do any kind of manipulation of the displacement map, please use Nuke for this. Nuke or Fusion or any other proper compositing application, because Photoshop is not a proper application when it comes to dealing with 32-bit files. In some pipelines though, the mid value is set to 0.5, and I worked with that as well. 0.5 is nice, because then you can see what you're doing. You can see this from the very beginning, but it doesn't really matter if it's 0.5 or if it's 0. Then we have 3 channels. 3 channels is you don't have to keep on. 3 channels simply means it's going to create, as the help menu here says, or help bar says, it's going to create 3 identical channels in TIFF format. This simply just means that you're going to have, instead of just having it in the red channel, you're going to have it in 3 channels, meaning red, green, and blue. It doesn't matter a whole lot if this is on or off. It's not actually going to change anything. It's just you only need 1 channel for a map because it's just a scalar value. But you can keep this on or off. It does not matter. 32-bit, however, this is essential. If your map is not 32-bit, you're not getting the information you need from ZBrush. So this is absolutely essential that this is on. If this is not on, you're going to get really nasty banding. And I'll explain what this is going to look like. So we have this here. So now let's say we want a displacement for this, and we get this nice curve here, and we can just get this really nice curve which we control perfectly. However, if 32-bit is off, we get this. So please keep this on. You really want to keep 32-bit on. EXR. EXR is really nice to have on, because then we get nice EXR files. EXR files are generally smaller than TIFF files, and they're more controllable. However, if EXR is on, merge map doesn't work, which is annoying. So I usually keep my files to TIFF files, then I convert it to TX files later on. But if you have merge maps on, which we do in this case, you need to keep this as a TIFF file. And by default, you get a TIFF file if EXR is not on. Then you have scale, intensity, and 16-bit scale, and get scale, and don't touch these ever. The cool thing about 32-bit maps like this is you don't have to change the scale. You don't have to change any settings in Modo. You just bring the map in, and it's fine. As long as the scale hasn't changed from when you exported the map from ZBrush, or the geometry from ZBrush to Modo, the scale is perfectly fine, which is one of the real beauties about 32-bit maps. And that's pretty much it for displacements. I know this is a lot to go through, but there's a lot of information here. But just take a screenshot of this and just look into the documentation we provided as well with the tutorial, because we have a little cheat sheet here as well. Because you don't want to memorize all this. Sure, it's nice to know, but essentially you just want to be able to look at a picture and be like, yep, these are the settings. But these are the settings I stick with when I'm working. Sometimes I have them at 0.5, or sometimes I have 0, depending on the pipeline I'm working in. And once this is done, we hit create all maps. And I'm just going to disable subtools now, and I'm just going to create a map just for the head here. And I'm going to make this just 512, just so you can see the naming. I just want this to be quick now. So create maps, and just put this in a folder which makes sense for you. I keep this all under, wrong folder. I keep this all in a folder in a consistent manner. So this is ZBrush Modo 3D, and I have a folder called textures. And here I do the same thing as I do with geometry. If I'm exporting something from Mari, I put it in a folder called from Mari, or here from ZBrush. Then I call this just maps 02, and hit OK. Or just hit save. And this is an important little thing. ZBrush is very temperamental in a lot of areas, this being one of them. When you're exporting out a map like this might take a while. It's not going to take a while now because we're just exporting out 2 UDIMs in 512. But this might take a while, so you're going to be tempted to alt-tab out and like check Facebook or whatever. Don't do it. The moment you're alt-tabbing out of ZBrush, there is a big chance that ZBrush will just freeze on you completely, and it can crash, or best case, it will take twice as long to generate the map. So when I'm doing this, I sometimes just leave my Wacom or my pen on my tablet, just so there is some life here. This is an extremely annoying feature, and I cannot comprehend why this has not been fixed yet. But in the current version of ZBrush, and it's been like this for years, you just have to keep hovering over like this. And also, don't click anywhere. I have no words to describe how stupid this is. But you cannot click anywhere, and you just have to keep the mouse going. So every once in a while, I just make sure I just move the mouse around a little bit. But you can also just leave the pen on the Wacom or on the tablet, and you should be fine.